you took over your state from Mitt Romney, who is almost certainly going to run for president. Did he do a good job as governor of Massachusetts?
You know, I think one of the best things he did was to be the co-author of our health care reform, which has been a model for national health care reform.
And that is some Bay State brotherhood, one Massachusetts governor loving on another.
Just the kind of praise Mitt Romney wants going into the Republican primary. Top Line begins right now.
Hello and welcome to ABC News Top Line. I'm Rick Klein.
And I'm Jonathan Carl.
Every day at noon Eastern, we're right here bringing you the latest in politics. It's twitter.com/Rick Klein, twitter.com/John Carl. John, up on the Hill today, what has got your eye with Congress back in session?
Well, it's Ryan's sandbag. You know, the Republicans have signaled that they're going to come out in their 2012 budget with entitlement reform. I'm told this is going to be Medicare reform. It is Paul Ryan's budget. He is the one, along with the freshman class, that has pushed them in this direction. But I've got to tell you, Rick, there is some real concern among Republican leaders here that Paul Ryan is taking them in a direction that is going to be very difficult politically. A quote from a top Republican advisor to many of the leadership told me just this morning, he's doing the right things for the right reasons, but he may cost us our majority. A lot of the older guard Republicans are very nervous about this.
Fascinating brinksmanship. We've seen President Obama say that he's committed to entitlement reform, but he wants the Republicans to go first. If Paul Ryan makes good on that, it could be some political consequences around that. Next up today, budget blink. It looks like Democrats are largely caving to Republicans in round one of the budget fights. That's around the continuing resolution to keep the government going for a few more weeks. Republicans say they want to shave about $4 billion in spending over a 2-week period, and Democrats have been warming to this idea. They know, John, that they really can't hold back this tide against attempts at cutting spending, and they look like they're ready to give in to most of the Republican demands, at least for now.
At least for the short term, this will avert the shutdown. And I'm telling you, it's a real portrait of bravery up here on Capitol Hill, Rick. I want you to consider that this $4 billion cut represents a full 1/400th of the budget deficit this year. They've really made some progress. So we'll see how it goes. My next thing up is fork in the road. Big day here on Capitol Hill. Styrofoam is back. The Republicans have turned back the clock on the Democratic Green the Capitol initiative. We now have plastic forks, knives, and spoons in the cafeteria here on the Capitol. And I got to tell you, Rick, I got a little treat for you. Right before they took away all the green stuff, I had a chance to use some of it. Take a look. These things are actually made out of a corn-based material now, not plastic. The problem is it doesn't always work so well. As you can see, the spoons tend to melt after a little while in your soup. Well, you know, the Republicans said this initiative cost money. It was like $475 million a year. Didn't actually help the environment very much. So now we're back to styrofoam and plastic.
And at least they biodegrade in front of your eyes. Look for the old stuff. Let's keep our hands on that. Next up, and finally today, it's Go Gingrich. All eyes are on Newt Gingrich over the next week to 10 days. It looks like he's going to be the first serious candidate for president on the Republican side. Indications that he's going to make an announcement on the exploratory committee, try to get another bite at the apple later on. Newt Gingrich, interesting timing around all of this, expecting him to be the first one in the pool, John, but also amid this talk of the government shutdown, here was the guy who was responsible for the last one.
Yeah, and Rick, as you well know, over the weekend in the Washington Post, he said that last government shutdown was actually a good thing, good for the country, good for the Republican Party, and he's saying if they have to do another shutdown here, they should do it. Which brings us to our first guest, Marlin Stutzman, Fort Wayne, Indiana, freshman Republican. Thank you for joining us here on Top Line.
Thanks, good to be with you.
So, Newt Gingrich says that you guys shouldn't be afraid of a shutdown. If that's what it's going to take to get what you need to get in terms of real budget cuts, and I know you want real budget cuts, are you willing to go that direction?
Well, you know, people back home are trying to figure out if they can take Washington serious right now, and if we don't get real cuts, I think that we're setting ourselves up for failure. And maybe a 2-week extension with some cuts is going to get us, starting down that path. But I'll tell you, what are we going to do? 2 weeks after 2 weeks after 2 weeks? At some point we're going to have to draw the line in the sand. And
even if that means some brinksmanship and possibly the government shutting down for a day or two?
Well, I think if Senator Reid and President Obama want to shut the government down over $2 billion in cuts or $4 billion in cuts, the American people are going to say, come on, let's get real. I mean, we're broke right now, and we're going to have to start making progress somehow. And if we don't take that first step and get to what we did in this past week or 2 weeks ago in a longer extension, the CR where we cut $60 billion, and then they're just not going to take us seriously. So I think we're going to have to stand up and say, hey, you know what? Either we start cutting the government and shrinking the size of government, or else we're going to face the political wrath of the American people.
Would it be a bad thing in your mind if in laying down these markers, if the Democrats reject what you want to do in cuts, that the result is a government shutdown? We know the government doesn't actually shut down when there's a government shutdown. You talk about non-essential workers who are furloughed for a period of time. Would that be a bad scenario?
This is not about wanting to shut the government down, but what it is about is wanting to cut spending. I mean, I'm a small business owner back in Indiana, and we have to cut spending in our budget when things get tight. And so that's what is so amazing about this place in Washington in the short amount of time that I've been here, is just the idea that people can't even bring themselves to discussion of real cuts. Now, we know that we're dealing with discretionary spending. The real cuts, the real reforms are going to happen within entitlement spending.
Okay, so let's go right to that. We heard from John Boehner yesterday, a speech before the National Association of Religious Broadcasters, saying that Paul Ryan's budget, your budget, is going to have real specific cuts outlined in Medicare, specific entitlement reform, which ultimately Medicare. Are you willing to go along with that? Are you worried that this could? I mean, as you heard me say, one top Republican said this could be the demise of your majority.
Well, we got to stop worrying about politics right now. We got to start worrying about America. And if we don't start dealing with the debt that we have and the deficit spending that we have in Washington, politics doesn't matter, because the American people do realize that they have to balance their budgets, and they expect the same thing from Washington. Back in Indiana, in the state legislature with Governor Daniels, we started cutting spending, we balanced the budget, and we made those difficult choices then, and we were rewarded for it. And I think that if we don't worry about the politics, if we worry about good policy, the politics will take care of itself if that's what you're worried about.
Congressman, you spent some time in your district last week, as did all members of Congress in the work period. What were you hearing from constituents about spending? Were people saying, I'm glad you guys are getting serious, or was there a little bit of frustration that you haven't been able to do more and more quickly?
No, there are actually a lot of good comments and saying, we're glad that you're sticking to your guns. We're glad that you're starting to move the ball forward. We realize that you have a lot of work in front of you, but don't, give up. Don't blink. And I thought that it was a very good week last week from what I heard back home. Coming back to Washington now and hearing about just a 2-week extension is a little frustrating, but if it gets us to that point where we can start cutting spending and start saving Americans their tax dollars from a bigger government, I think that they're going to be patient with us, but we can't start getting distracted with this 2-week extension.
Okay, now you know how this place has often worked, politics since the dawn of time. I mean, one side wants one thing, the other side wants something, you meet in the middle. You guys have gone for $61 billion for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
The Senate Democrats' position was to freeze it, so in other words, zero in actual cuts. Are you going to be comfortable voting in favor of something that is, roughly half of what you guys voted on? $30 billion in cuts?
Well, I'm not going to like it. It's not what I would want, but I do realize that there has to be compromise. I think the big point that needs to be made here is that we're going to start cutting spending. And if we are going to start that process, I think people back home are going to start taking Washington seriously, because I'll tell you right now, they don't take Washington serious. And those job creators, that money that's sitting on the sidelines, is waiting to see what's going to happen, because the larger our deficits get, the larger our debt gets, people see that, and it's translating into that's potential tax increases. And they're not going to go out and start spending if they think that there's going to be more taxes down the road because of more spending.
Quickly, Congressman, have you gotten as much done as you hoped to in your first 2 months in this new Congress, or are you hoping to have even more accomplishments at this stage?
Oh, I hope there's a lot more accomplished. The government here works very slowly. I mean, I visited the State House back in Indiana, and they're already halfway through the session there, and I see what they're trying to get done there. And it's obviously a good thing that government operates as slowly as it does, but I just hope that the mentality here is what we're really changing, because it needs to be a cultural change here rather than just, to start with, and then hopefully we'll start getting to real action rather than just words, and where we're actually starting to cut spending and starting to get the growth of government to slow down and get the growth of our economy to speed up.
All right, well, at least you got the styrofoam back.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you
Good
very
news,
much.
good
Governor
news.
Stutzman. Thank you for joining us on
Thank you.
Top Line.